What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, and on this episode, for the first time ever, we're doing the show live on Twitter Spaces. If you miss any of tonight's episode, you can find it anywhere you get your podcasts on replay. It'll be up later on tonight. YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Google, Apple Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, you can find us at for any and all past and future episodes of the podcast. But I've got a couple things that I want to get to here with tonight's episode around the Premier Lacrosse League. The bye week is now over, so we're heading to Baltimore for week 3. I'll be there down in Baltimore for the PLL games this upcoming weekend. My first time seeing these guys live, so I'm super pumped about that. But like I said, couple things I want to get to with this episode. The first, it happened earlier this week. We got the decision about the Gaudet Staats situation, so I want to give you guys my thoughts real quick on that before we move on with the rest of the episode. Later on in this segment, I'll get to my week 3 breakdown, briefly breaking down each matchup here this weekend in week 3 of the PLL season. But to give you guys my thoughts on this Gaudet Staats situation, I wanted to wait until after it was all resolved. The league did their investigation. They came out with their ruling. I believe it was Tuesday afternoon we got their decision on that. But to give you guys my thoughts on this, you know, we don't really know entirely what the situation was that occurred there. We've heard the stories on social media, specifically on Twitter, from some PLL insiders about what they've heard happened, and basically what it amounts to from the stories that I've heard and what I've read is that drinks were consumed, words were exchanged in a hotel lobby, and eventually Gaudet lost his finger in some sort of a fisticuffs that went on there. So again, we're not 100% sure about the story there. Obviously, you're not going to hear much from the league as far as that goes, but when you look at the punishment itself, which I'll get to my thoughts on that in a second, but when you look at the punishment that was handed out to both the players involved in that incident, it wasn't something that was sort of a knee-jerk reaction like within 24 hours of the incident coming out on social media. The league did what they had to do. I think they did it right by taking the time to investigate it. They took about 2 weeks to do so, which is how we ended up with the verdict on it a few days ago. But they took the time to do it the right way. They looked into it, and they said that they voted on a course of action for both players involved as far as how to handle the situation and the punishment that was handed down to them. And the word from the league is that they voted unanimously to terminate the contracts of both players. And I think that for me, for what we know of the situation and the way that the league is trying to carry itself as a up-and-coming pro league here in America, is that they handled it the right way. I think the punishment, while it may be severe to some people, I think that when you're an up-and-coming league like this, you're trying to make a name for yourself and you're trying to do so the right way with the right image. A ruling like this or a punishment like this, I think, fits, because what the league is doing is they're setting a precedent for off the field incidents, and I think even in some cases on the field incidents as well, where they say, hey, look, we're trying to build something here, we're trying to make a name for ourselves, we're doing everything we can to get more people to our game, but we want to do it the right way. And that means when we make headlines, we want to make headlines for the right reason. We want to make it because we're making SportsCenter's top plays, not because a second-year player lost his finger in a hotel lobby. Like, that's not the kind of image that we want. So what the league did, in my opinion, was they cracked down and said, hey, we're not going to tolerate this stuff. Either you're with us or you're out. Either you're going to help us or you're not going to be part of this moving forward. So that, like I said, I wanted to give you guys my thoughts on that real quick to start out this episode, because look, this podcast covers the PLL. It talks about all the news going on in the league, and unfortunately this is newsworthy. right? We got that decision a few days ago, and I think it's something that we have to talk about and then obviously be able to move forward. So that's what we did. So now getting to my thoughts here on week 3 in the PLL, I'll break down all 5 games coming up this weekend. Like I said at the top of the show, I'll be there in Baltimore for my first look live at these teams ever. I'm super pumped about that. But getting to this first game tomorrow night, the Atlas and the Whip Snakes. I mean, the Whip Snakes outlasted a really good Cannons team in overtime 2 weeks ago in Atlanta. But when you really look at this team and the way that they break down, Joe Nardella is basically automatic at this point at faceoff, and a guy like Zed Williams is really starting to benefit from that because you saw it against the Cannons time and time again. Nardella wins that faceoff clean to himself. He charges towards the net, draws that slide, moves it to Williams, who for some reason was the guy they chose to slide from, and he just steps in and rips it, right? I mean, that just seemed way too easy for them, and yet the Cannons allowed them to do it time and time again, which I kind of thought was surprising that they didn't seem to make that adjustment at all. But the defense for the Whip Snakes, while it may not be up to what they were just last summer in the championship series, it's still a very, very good defense. Still probably top 2, at worst top 3 defense in the league, I would say. So still very, very good. It's something that they lean heavily on, and especially having a guy like Bernlohr and Cage does help as well. But looking on the other side with the Atlas in this game, the Atlas definitely showed me something against the Redwoods 2 weeks ago. They showed a lot of heart and a lot of hustle, and I think overall just better execution all around from what we saw from them in week 1 against the Archers. Was just a complete breakdown, I think, of basically everything from defense to offense to even struggling at times to win faceoffs, it seemed like. But and Kincannon and Cage, one of those guys where it almost seemed like if all else failed in the past, you at least had Jack Kincannon to save the day. But even in that game, he wasn't on his best game. So it was nice to see them bounce back against the Redwoods. And I think the offense really showed us what they can be once they put it all together. I really love the look of whether it's Baccaro, Eric Law, Jay Carraway. When they carried their guy to X against the Redwoods 2 weeks ago, they were very efficient, being able to generate offense and to generate looks off their ability to do that, to isolate those certain matchups like they did. And we also saw them bring back the John Crawley, Eric Law 2-man game at X, which in 2019 worked phenomenally for them, being able to, again, to pick the matchup that they wanted and go attack it, and that's what they did. So I think when you look at this matchup, the key for the Whip Snakes is to just keep doing you. Keep winning faceoffs, keep hitting singles. The defense is what it is. We all know that. For the Atlas, it's keep showing that improvement week to week, like I've been talking about. Show that you're getting better on the little things each and every week. Show that you're putting in that work to clean up some of the little mistakes that we know that this team, for whatever reason, is prone to making. And another thing that you can look for this weekend with them having 2 games on Friday and Sunday is that 7% mentality that we heard Crawley talk about at the end of their game against the Redwoods, having that 7% mentality that only 7% of people in the polls that game had them winning that game. So that's something that, again, this weekend, I'm going to look for that hustle, that intensity, the execution, all have to be there this weekend, because these are 2 very tough games that the Atlas are going to be having to play down in Baltimore. Then on Saturday, the Redwoods will take on the Chaos. The Redwoods didn't play great against the Atlas, even though he was one of their leading scorers in the game. Rob Pinnell had 4 turnovers in that one, but T.D. Erlin won the faceoff matchup against Trevor Baptiste, which was an absolutely phenomenal matchup to watch throughout that game. So I don't think he'll have too much trouble against the Chaos, a team facing off below 40% for the year. And the offense does have a tendency to look sloppy at times, for sure, but I think it'll be more so tricky for them to try and get that under control against a Chaos defense that really right now is one of the bright spots of their team, along with goalie Blaze Reardon. And I think that the Chaos, when you look at this game and this weekend in general, they have a lot of new faces coming in on offense, whether it's from the player pool or activating guys from the travel list, which one of them for the Atlas we'll get to in segment 2. But it'll be interesting to see how the Chaos's newly rebuilt offense with some of these incoming guys looks in week 3, because they are, through the first 3 games of their schedule, the worst offensive efficiency team in the league, averaging 19 turnovers per game. So the keys in this game for me that I'll be watching for the Redwoods is just to get back on track and don't turn it over. You know, when I say get back on track, I mean after that loss to the Atlas, because believe it or not, that was an upset, right? That was a upset by the Atlas over the Redwoods. So the Redwoods need to bounce back, avoid going to 2-2 on the year, get back on the right track, and just don't turn the ball over. For the Chaos, again, it'll be interesting to see what this retooled offense looks like, and can they win faceoffs, right? In addition to not turning the ball over, can they win faceoffs? They have to do better than what they've done these first couple games. The other game on Saturday, the Water Dogs and the Archers. The Water Dogs offense really, to me, 2 weeks ago came alive with 2 games on the weekend, specifically Mikey Schlosser and Ryan Brown lighting it up in that second weekend. Dylan Ward also, I think, is starting to look more comfortable in the cage after having sort of an iffy first outing in week 1. But Jake Withers at the faceoff is really making a statement to me as a guy that can be a top 4, easily top 5 faceoff man in this league. But when you look at the Archers, man, the Archers offense is just so fun to watch, because they have so many shooters that, like I said with Phil Rothermick and Jordan Johnson a week ago, they have so many shooters that can come from basically every angle on a defense, and it just makes it so tough to defend them 6-on-6. And when you look at the defense for this Archers team, this defense might be the best that Chris Bates has had in the PL in his time in the PLL. So I think when you look at this matchup, the Water Dogs and the Archers on Saturday night, this to me will be a high scoring game. I don't know what the betting lines or anything like that is. I don't really get into any of that really, especially not here on this show. So I don't know what the betting lines or anything look like that for that game, but that to me is probably going to be somewhat of a high scoring game, So my keys for the Water Dogs is just keep the sticks hot on offense. Ward needs to continue gaining that confidence as a starter in this league after backing up Blaze Reardon for the last 2 years. And Withers, I think, should win a majority of the faceoffs in this given matchup. For the Archers, Gittleman has to just keep going with his hot start. I mean, he's played a game and a half. I'm not sure what the decision was in week 2 to only let him play the second half of that game, but in the time that he's played this year, he's been lights out for the Archers. So he needs to continue that this week against a Water Dogs offense that you saw in week 2 is starting to gain some momentum, starting to gain some confidence, and really just let the offense go out and do what it does. We know the kind of shooters they have, the kind of playmakers they have. Just go out there and let those guys do what they do. Then on Sunday, we got a couple games to get to as we wrap up this first segment of the show. Again, doing it live here on Twitter Spaces. If you miss any of the show here tonight, you can go back and watch it on replay on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, Google, Apple Podcasts. The list goes on and on. You can basically find us anywhere. But to get to the Sunday slate of games, the Cannons will take on the Atlas. Game 2 of the weekend for the Atlas. Like I said, 2 really big games on the weekend in Baltimore for the Bulls. But the Cannons looked really good in week 2 despite the overtime loss to the Whip Snakes. They took them down to the wire. They went toe-to-toe with them. Their record really is, to me, deceiving. I don't think it's indicative of how good this club really is. And I think by the time it's all said and done at the end of the year, the Cannons will be a top 4 team in the PLL. The defense has been really good in front of Nick Morocco with guys like Brody Merrill, Jack Keelty, Jake Pulver, and Reese Eddy, despite the cheap shot that Reese Eddy took a few weeks ago. I believe that was the hit on Sowers he was responsible for. But the defense as a whole has been really good for this Cannon squad, and anytime you've got an offense centered around Lyle Thompson, you're going to do pretty well at that end of the field. But guys like Q, Steven Rafis, and Paul Rabel, in my opinion, they've really played well within this offense. They've really played within their role I think almost to perfection at times. So my keys to this game for the Cannons are: show us why you deserve to be a true top 4 team in this league. They're obviously just on the outside looking in at that top 4, but show us that you can be a top 4 caliber team and show us why you deserve to be that. For the Atlas, I think it's really simple. Continue battling, win or lose, show some fight, show some improvement with your execution, and just playing an all-around solid game, not having a game like we had a couple weeks ago where you walked away from it almost feeling sorry for how poorly they played against the Archers. And then to round out the segment number 1 of the show, we got a couple more things to get to. The final game of the weekend, the Chrome 0-2 against the Whipsnakes in their second game of the weekend. The Chrome added a few players to their team from the player pool during the bye week. Most notably probably is former Penn State defenseman Nick Cardiel. Got a chance to see him play live earlier this spring with Penn State. I called a game in Ann Arbor when they played Michigan. Loved watching him play and just both sides in general in that one. But back on topic here, I think just like the Chaos, the offense for the Chrome needs to be more efficient, averaging 19 turnovers a game. That's not going to win you a ton of games in this league. And I understand the Chrome have been hit a lot with injuries so far this year, but they still have pieces to where they can win games this year. Not necessarily rolling over and just taking their losses, but they still have the ability with the team that they have to be able to win. And I think that starting this week, they need to start pumping out some wins to get back on track. And I think when you look at the offense, especially getting guys like Colin Heacock and Justin Gutterding going, I believe they both have 3 points in their first 2 games. Getting guys like that going will definitely help at the offensive end. And also they added Tom Palasek. It'll be interesting to see if he makes the trip to Baltimore this weekend and how they'll use him within their system. But I think for the Whipsnakes in their second game of the weekend on Sunday, for the Whipsnakes, it's more than likely, I think, that they're going to win this game. I think it would shock many, many people if they didn't win this game. And I think really it's just a matter for them of how many goals are you going to win it by? How many goals are you going to need to catch the Archers, who currently sit in first place by, I think, a goal differential of about 9? And for the Chrome, it's what can you show me offensively outside of some of the younger guys like Kevin Rogers and Jackson Morrill, as far as being able to execute this offense and put points on the board. So we're going to take a quick break, come back for segment 2 in just a minute. I've got some stuff I want to get to with Jeff Teat. Obviously, we know he's been activated finally here for week 3 in the PLL. I'll also put a bow on this Joel Tinney thing because honestly, I think it's about time that we wrap that one up. But you're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Welcome back. Segment 2 of the podcast, Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. In segment 1, I talked about the Gaudet Staats situation and the punishment handed down by the league. Also broke down each matchup coming into week 3 in the PLL for Baltimore starting tomorrow night. Segment 2, like I said, I want to talk some Jeff Teat here in just a minute, being activated by the Atlas for week 3, but I want to put a bow on this discussion that I've been having ongoing for about a year now around Joel Tinney and the Atlas. So like I said, Joel Tinney, in my opinion, won't finish the season as a member of the Atlas. That may or may not be a hot take, I don't know, but in my opinion, the way that it's been trending for a while now, I don't think he finishes the season as a member of the Atlas. So now the question is, does he finish in the player pool, or does he get picked up by another squad? If he does get picked up by another squad, there's 2 in particular that I'm not sure if I mentioned in last Thursday's episode, but there's 2 teams that I think if he does find his way to the player pool could get picked up pretty quickly by one of the 2. The first is the Chaos because he's a box guy. We all know that Andy Towers loves his box guys, so I think he would fit the kind of player that they're looking for specifically on offense for them. And as a offensive mid, he can dodge, he can feed. So I think he could really help them offensively with what we know is one of the worst offensive efficiency teams in the league right now. I think having a guy like that you can put the ball in his stick, he can move the ball, facilitate that offense, and make the guys around him better. I think he could really fit that chaos offense pretty well. The other one is the Chrome, because again, they've been beat up by injuries all over the field, specifically on offense. And I think he could help really be able to feed some of these guys like Gutterding and Heacock in this offense and help, again, just like I said with the chaos, make the guys around him on offense better. So is he a great player? This was something that Jordan and I kind of got into a little bit last week, is he a great player? No, but I think he's good enough to where he can make an impact in this league and be able to play a meaningful role on one of these 8 teams. Clearly, though, at this point, the Atlas is not one of them. So I do think he deserves a chance to be able to move on and find a new home in this league. But getting to Jeff Teat now, as I said at the top of the segment, the Atlas activating Jeff Teat to the active roster finally. Again, the travel list has been shrinking over the past few days, heading into week 3, thankfully, so we're finally going to get to see some of these guys suit up here in 2021. But Jeff Teat, number 1 overall pick in the college draft to the Atlas, we've been waiting on him to make his arrival, and it's finally come. We'll get to see him tomorrow night suiting up for the Atlas. He'll wear number 7 because Tucker Durkin is obviously already occupying the number 51 jersey for the Bulls. But with Teat, I'll be interested to see how much he actually plays this weekend after not really having the opportunity to practice with the Atlas very much, I would imagine, and probably doesn't have a great grasp of their system yet. If he did, I'd actually be amazed at that. But I think for him, it's more, how is his conditioning look? Because I think as long as he's able to run with some of these guys and he's able to play at a high level, his skill is just too good to leave him on the sideline if in fact he is there suited up, ready to play. I think it's as simple as get the ball in his stick and figure out a way to get him involved in the offense. Because again, he's too good of a playmaker to just have him sitting there and maybe getting a few runs here and there. Get the ball in his stick and just try and create opportunities for him to go put up points on the board. And I think by adding in a guy like Jeff Teat the rest of the season going forward, it really adds another wrinkle to this Atlas offense, where I said in segment 1, watching guys like Caraway, Baccaro, Eric Law carrying their man to X against the Redwoods and just attacking those matchups time and time again, having a guy like Teat that you can stick on the lefty wing and hit that skip pass once you make it to GLE, attacking from X, I think that adds a huge dynamic to this offense. One that really, I think if you go back to 2019, we saw with Eric Law and then having Ryan Brown on that opposite wing. So now Teat kind of fills that role within that offense. And then the John Crawley, Eric Law 2-man game from X, I think again, that could open up looks for a guy like Teat off the lefty wing to be able to step into some shots, or you just bang it up top to a guy like Caraway or Brian Costabile and let them dodge and try to create their own shot. But I think overall, when you really look at this Jeff Teat thing, when you talk about it from an Atlas standpoint, because I am, as you guys know, an Atlas fan, is the great mystery to Atlas fans was, when are we going to see Jeff Teat be able to come over and suit up for this team? And now we have our answer. He'll help this offense, I think, in a ton of ways just by getting him on the field here in week 3. And you can sort of figure out the rest later. Just get him on the field, get the ball in his stick, and figure out what to do with him later on once he has a chance to get in there, practice with these guys a little bit, learn the system a little bit more, and learn these guys' tendencies. But this offense, I think, in week 3 is going to be ready to unleash, because now they have the pieces in place with the addition of Jeff Teat to be able to go out there and just start running things the way that they want to do it. So we're going to take one more quick break, come back. The final segment, I want to give you guys my all-star ballot that I filled out the other night, and I'll give you my final thoughts as we head into week 3 in Baltimore for the PLL. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. All right, final segment of the show, guys. Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Steven MacDonald here with you, as always. Like I said, we're going to get to my all-star ballot here in just a second. Then we'll wrap up the show, put a bow on it. My final thoughts heading to Baltimore for week 3. Again, I'll be down there in Baltimore to watch these guys play for the first time live. So I'm really excited about that. If you missed any previous part of this show, segment 1 or 2, you can go back, check that out on Spotify, YouTube, Google, Apple Podcast, anywhere you guys get your podcasts, you can find us there. So go check that out for any and all episodes that you may have missed. But to get to my all-star ballot at Attack, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but there was a lot of decisions to be made here. I think when putting my all-star ballot together, there were guys that I felt I had to leave off, and I have my reasons for that, but I'll get to who those guys were once I get through this list. But at Attack, I've got Lyle Thompson, Rob Pennell, Ryan Brown, Ben Reeves, Zed Williams, and Grant Ament. In the midfield, I went with Miles Jones, Paul Rabel, Jules Henningberg, Zach Currier, Zach Goodrich, and Troy Ray as my LSM. The defense, I went with Graham Hosick, Garrett Epple, Brody Merrill, Cade Van Raphorst, Eli Gobrecht, and Jack Rowlett. At faceoff, T.D. Erlin and Joe Nardella, and my goalies were Adam Gittleman and Nick Morocco. So like I said, there was some guys that I felt got snubbed from this list. Again, it was really hard just being able to pick the 6 guys for attack, midfield, and defense. But at Attack, one guy that I really think a lot of people will end up having on their ballots is Andrew Q, because again, everybody wants to talk about Lyle Thompson. Obviously, I had him on my list, but Andrew Q has been one of those guys that I mentioned in, I believe it was segment 1, that along with Paul Rabel, Rafis, those guys, they've played very well within their role in that Cannons offense, taking some of that pressure off a guy like Lyle Thompson and being able to be effective, you know, putting shots in the back of the net. Rabel struggled with that a year ago, so it's nice to see him being able to shoot the ball at a high percentage this year. In the midfield, it was hard to vote for an all-star midfield and not have a guy like Tom Schreiber in it, And originally I did have him as one of my 6, but I bumped him out at the last minute when prepping for this show. So I do think plenty of people will have him on their all-star ballots, but for me, I went with Jules Henningberg instead. Defense and LSM, I picked Troy Ray as my LSM, but Michael Earhart, I think, is a guy that's going to be tough to leave off ballots, and I think he's a guy that you will see end up in that all-star game coming from the Whipsnakes. At faceoff, Stephen Kelly, Connor Farrell, and Trevor Baptiste are all facing off over 50% this year, but it's tough to pick one of them when T.D. Erlin and Joe Nardella are both facing off over 60%. I mean, these guys have been unreal through the first 2 weeks of the PLL season, so it was hard not to vote for those 2 guys for the faceoff position. Then goalie, again, I think it's the same situation when you look at midfield, is how do you vote for an all-star midfield and not have a guy like Tom Schreiber in it? I think the same can be said about voting for an all-star goalie position and not voting for Blaze Reardon with currently a 60% save percentage. But for me, I went, I think, a little more by the eye test here and went with Gittleman and Morocco. So that's my PLL all-star ballot that I filled out the other night. I wanted to share that with you, maybe get some of your thoughts on my list as well, because like I said, there's guys that are going to be snubbed on people's lists, and I'd love to hear some of your snubs that you guys had on your list. But to get to my final thoughts here as we head into week 3 in the PLL for Baltimore is plain and simply, I'm excited to be a part of it. Again, it's my first weekend experiencing the PLL live, so I'm super excited about them. I'm really looking forward to spending the weekend watching these teams play live and just getting to be at a place like Baltimore and Homewood Field and getting to experience all that this weekend has to offer. But that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Make sure to like, comment, and share on the podcast, guys. You can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube as well. You can find us also on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts. We are now at, but that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.